Located in Cambridge, Maryland, we are along the shores of the Choptank River. Hi, my name is Imani Black. I'm a faculty research assistant and first-year grad student here at Horn Point Laboratory. One of my main focuses is sustainability within aquaculture, but also promoting the practices of aquaculture, not just locally, but globally. Minorities in Aquaculture is a nonprofit that I started in October of 2020 to help empower and encourage and educate women of color to get into this rapidly growing field. It's one of my passions to just totally expand the oyster industry globally, but also to educate people on how it has become the focal point of our sustainable seafood resource. The Choptank spans over 68 miles from the tip of Talbot County to the southern part of Dorchester County, and culturally it is known as the character and society of the Eastern Shore. It's also home to some of the most influential people in our history, like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman, who used these waters for navigation through their journeys through the Underground Railroad. Along with this history, this area has been built on its reliance of its rich seafood diversity, supporting many families, becoming one of the largest commercial fishing industries on the Chesapeake Bay today. Like many historical areas on the bay, millions of oysters were annually harvested up until the 1970s, when disease, overharvesting, and habitat degradation drastically declined the oyster populations. As the demand for oysters continued to increase, aquaculture was introduced as a sustainable and economical support for the expansion of the oyster industry. There are more than 300 oyster farmers along the bay that practice different types of aquaculture practices in Maryland. At Horn Point, we are dedicated to expanding and supporting the oyster industry in many ways. Since 2015, our hatchery has become one of the largest oyster hatcheries on the Eastern Shore.
We're actually one of the largest hatcheries in North America.
In North America, our hatchery has become one of the largest oyster hatcheries in North America, providing a variety of oyster larvae for research, educational programs, and oyster restoration. Recognizing the many challenges within the commercial industry, Horn Point, with the support of the Radcliffe Foundation, established a Shellfish Aquaculture Innovation Lab to develop new technology and practices to increase the commercial shellfish production.
Hi, my name is Alyssa. I'm the hatchery manager here at the Shellfish Aquaculture Innovation Lab, or SAIL. So a little bit about me. I grew up in New Jersey. I got my degree in marine science from Stockton University. I took a summer job with the Rutgers Aquaculture Innovation Center, and I just absolutely fell in love with it. So a little bit about SAIL. We are a research hatchery. We were established in 2019 thanks to the generous support of the Radcliffe Foundation. So our goals here are to develop new technology for farmers so that they can increase their production at lower costs. The shellfish industry here in Maryland is absolutely booming, but our big bottleneck right now is just technology. So we do some oyster production, and we also are working on new equipment and new techniques and things that other farmers or other growers can implement on their operation. All right, so if you guys want to come in, I'll show you around. All right, so the first step to oyster production, it always starts in the algae room. Oysters eat algae, so in a hatchery setting, when we're growing larvae and they're super tiny, we want to give them the best algae we can give them. So here we grow 6 different species of algae, all very high in nutritional value. We have a couple flagellates, so algae that swims. We also have a few diatoms here as well. So you can see here some carboys. So those are mid-scale cultures. We will use those to inoculate larger scale cultures, which I can show you next door. So in a room like this, we just want to make sure that we are super clean. We're wearing gloves, we're working under a fume hood, because there's lots of things that like to eat algae other than oysters. It's very easy for cultures to get contaminated. So this is kind of its own separate room, and when we're in here, we are working with gloves and alcohol, and everything is as clean as possible.
Hey!
Keep walking. Act natural.
This facility used to be a fish hatchery, so they did some finfish projects here, sturgeon, clownfish. So these blue tanks here, they were once growing all kinds of finfish. That was in the early 2000s. So when we came here, we basically spent the whole year just refurbishing the facility, and you know, we are using mainly the same equipment. You can see from these pipes up here, we can get seawater right from the chop tank. We have some treated cold water, filtered water, just regular raw water. And then the research give us capability to kind of manipulate that further because they would be closed off. So then we can either salt them, we could change the temperature of them, and kind of do things that we wouldn't just find immediately in the environment at this time of year. So we have some smaller research here, a little bit smaller than the ones next door. The Recirculating Aquaculture System, or RAS, means that basically we fill them up with our seawater and then we close them off and we just recycle that water for an indefinite period of time. So the major benefit to using RAS for grow out is that, again, we have total control of our environment. So that means that we are not relying on Mother Nature. In 2018, the Chesapeake Bay had a major wet season, the salinity dropped, and so many hatcheries just could not get larvae through. It just really messed up the conditions in the bay. And then that made farmers have a difficult time getting seed because there were no larvae. So to avoid events like that, we can have the capability to bring water in and salt it, or treat it if there's a bacteria problem or if there's a harmful algal bloom. We can kind of predict these and then pull in that water and hold it so that we avoid those bad water quality events. How RAS operates is that we have our culture tanks where our animals sit, and then we have a series of filters that treat the water constantly. So in a typical RAS, we would have particle filtration, so any kind of solids, dirt, sands, things like that. Then we have some form of sterilization for bacteria. So for us, we have a UV light. Foam fractionation to remove like small particles and proteins out of the water. And then some kind of biofiltration. So something that can remove the ammonia waste out of the water. That's the most important part of the research. A benefit to rearing shellfish larvae in a RAS is, again, as I mentioned before, total control of the environment, but also if the systems are being used efficiently, we could really increase our stocking densities, so we can grow potentially 6 to 10 times the amount of animals in a much smaller space. So that would help a grower increase their production. So it's super important that we stay organized and we manage our data properly. So I just kind of put up my goals for the next couple months up on this board, so I make sure that we're on track with building stuff and developing these projects. Every person that's running a project here, they are, they have their own way of collecting and organizing that data. Daily sheets, Excel sheets, things like that they can go back on in the winter and kind of analyze. Usually the hatchery season is very busy this summer. We got a lot going on, so we want to go back and look it all over in the winter when we've kind of shut down here. We are a research facility, but we're also a hatchery, so you might be wondering, what is a hatchery and why is it important? A hatchery basically will take parent oysters and breed them and rear out all of their little babies, on the orders of millions of them. And so we grow them from their microscopic swimming stage out to their seed stage, and then we would supply those to farmers. So they come out of the hatchery at this size.
So now we have our seed, which is about this size. Now the real question is, how can we get it to a fully marketable oyster that's about that size? My name is Brendan Campbell. I am a PhD candidate at UMCS, and I study the physical environment around shellfish aquaculture and shellfish production. I came from New Jersey, where I worked on a bunch of different oyster and clam farms, and decided that I wanted to go into research so that I could try to understand how to improve production on shellfish farms. There's two major ways to grow oysters. The first of which being that you plant them on the ground to act like a oyster reef, or you switch over to some of these bags over here, and we'll put these oysters in those bags for them to grow until they're that market size. And then depending on what gear type we want to use, if we want to deploy them on the bottom, we use something that looks about like this. We could grow them sort of mid-column so that they get some sun exposure during the day. Or lastly, we could just set them directly on floats and we just slide the bag right on in and they just sit at the top of the water. So one of those gear types, looking at the mid-column gear, these smaller cages. So if you want to see a real demonstration of them, we have these deployed out at one position in the water column. And we do that so that during the low tide, these cages will actually get some sun exposure, and that'll help not only grow the oysters a little bit, but it also controls some of the fouling organisms that grow on those cages. So this is, as you can see, a pretty fouled up cage. And the problem with this is that it impedes the flow coming into these cages so that the oysters can't feed as much. So having something like this where they can grow out of the water kills off some of that fouling so they can continually feed throughout the day. So my research is focused more on this flow aspect, because more flow, I'm not good on camera. Because more flow, more grow, more dough, right? So how can we culture oysters so that we can optimize the flow moving through these cages so that our oysters can grow faster and that we can increase our production? So some of the things that we were looking at was, for one, biofouling, which is a huge problem for aquaculture. How can we control that or work with it so that we can still get the best product possible? Also, we want to look at different gear type. How can we use those cages optimally to improve our production? All right, well, and the best perks of the job is that, free oysters, right? Oh, this one's rough. Oh no. Dude, that's a rough looking one. The best perk of the job is free oysters.
That looked delicious. Meanwhile, back at Sail.
Why, hello. I couldn't hear you over mass extinction caused by the human race. This might look like a tropical beach in the Vegas, but it's actually the tank used to determine the difference between live and dead oysters using ROV technology. Hi, my name is Alan Williams. I'm an engineer by training, but I switched over to marine science after this really cool experience called an REU 2 years ago in 2019. Hey Mike, how you doing? This project uses remote operated vehicles, or ROVs, and machine learning in order to determine the difference between oyster shells amongst other sediments and items within the bay. Some fun facts about Arizona. We have a lot of karate, but we have absolutely zero oceans. You'd never see something like this, whatever the hell this is. You won't see anything like that over in Arizona. You'll find a few cactuses, but water. Now some of you might be wondering, what am I doing here? To be honest, I have no idea. But I am told that I'm going to be measuring sediment plume dynamics. Now, dredging equipment is used in oyster aquaculture to collect inventory, but it scratches the bottom of that oyster aquaculture patch. Our ROV can go in, manage that inventory without even touching the ground. Now this project is going to be lasting for 5 total years. You want to stick around for that, because we got more to show you coming up.
The filter feeding activity of oysters is thought to play an important role in improving the bay's water quality. We can see a demonstration of that here. As oysters feed, they remove particles from the water and improve water clarity. Much of what we know about oyster biofiltration comes from short-term laboratory studies that typically hold temperature, salinity, or diets constant over time. But oysters live in estuaries with rapidly fluctuating conditions, which may affect the way oysters feed. Graduate student Laura Wiltsey is developing a long-term monitoring system that will record oyster feeding and respiration and pair it with high-tech equipment that will monitor the fluctuating conditions in the Chesapeake Bay.
Hi, I'm Laura. I'm from up in New Jersey. I came down to Sail about a year ago to start my master's here. I'm also the Sail Research Fellow, which is a position funded by the Radcliffe Foundation. Thanks, Radcliffe. I graduated from Rutgers with a bachelor's degree in marine science and a minor in ecology, evolution, and natural resources. Coming down here, I wanted to try to combine those two interests and ended up studying oysters. So my project will be incorporating a feeding system that will show real-time data of respiration and feeding together for oysters. In the past, people have tried studying feeding and respiration, usually separately, and usually in a lab. This system will be bringing in raw water from the trap tank. It will be sending it through a flow cytobot, which will take pictures of each individual animal that moves through the system. And it can tell us a lot about what the oysters are eating, both before and after entering a flow-through chamber where the oyster will be housed, and we can tell how much it eats in the time that the water spends in that chamber. And then when it comes out again, we can see exactly what phytoplankton and little critters that the oyster's eating along the way. This can tell us a lot about how the oysters are growing in aquaculture industry, and also as ecosystem restoration efforts. It can tell us a lot about how much they're filtering and eating and how much they're actually impacting the environment. This is going to be a really large data set coming from a lot of different sensors, all that need to be integrated together. So a big part of what I'm doing here is learning how to code and how to integrate those sensors. And being able to code was a big part of what I wanted to learn in graduate school, because I know that I might not be working with oysters for my whole career, but it's good to get that base and be able to integrate this and use it in future projects that I might be working on.
I'm sorry, what were you saying?
My machine learning class, I got an A+ in, so.
Way to go.
The system that I'm developing is also going to be integrated to help with our RAS system here in Sale. It will be used to automate the feeding system that we use and take out a lot of the time that we spend per day counting algae and doing some of the smaller tasks. But a lot of what I do is still scrubbing tanks, feeding oysters, and doing lots of work around Sale.